The industry of things broadens the concept of Internet of Things. This is Gary Minchell, and this podcast is brought to you by Ignition from Inductive Automation. I've just returned from San Diego and the Industry of Things USA conference or forum, which brought together about 450 people, more or less, and a lot of end users, a lot of good hallway conversation amongst people who are actually trying to implement various aspects of the Internet of Things. The theme of the conference basically was getting business benefits. There was a lot of technology discussion, but actually it was technology in the service of building better businesses, companies, and so on, as opposed to just technology as an end in itself. Interesting thing, this conference is organized from Germany by a German company. They have no U.S. representative, particularly, and yet they put together a conference that easily is twice as large, and in some cases 3 times as large, as conferences in our industry that are organized by local U.S. media companies. In fact, somebody asked me about that, given my background of 16, 18 years with media, and basically said they just work very hard. They really work it, and they're very broad. They're not focused on a small segment like a media company that is focused on just its readership typically, or a specific narrower definition of where they're going. This is pretty broad, so it attracts a lot more people, and more people means more enthusiasm and more hallway buzz and all that sort of stuff. So it was really a good conference, and I moderated a track. I've written one blog post, no, 2 blog posts over the track that I moderated that was business benefits of all the data that you collect from Internet of Things. There were 3 other tracks. I had 4 simultaneous tracks. Our track, the room probably seated 100. I didn't count for sure. And it was mostly packed for all 7 sessions. And I know some of the other sessions were very good too. I don't know what the attendance was there, but a lot of interest, and it's really cool. So you might think about that. They're coming back to San Diego in late February, early March next year. I hope they don't conflict with other places I go, but it's really good, and it's my second time there, and I really appreciate it. So check out my blog at themanufacturingconnection.com for 2 or 3 write-ups that I did on that. But like I say, the basic theme was, what do I do with the data? I've got Internet of Things, and what I'm trying to do is build a better business based on all of that. A lot of the stuff was connections. When I talked to various people, I interviewed. Interesting enough, one thing was connected vehicles. So we had somebody from Caterpillar mining, well, big construction equipment, if you will, and we had somebody from Volvo trucks about connecting. Those are over-the-road trucks, and connecting those and what you can do with that. Somebody from Boeing talking about the digital twin. Not so much connections, although a little bit about tracking the digital twin throughout the life cycle of an aircraft, from design to end of life, when they basically disassemble it and salvage parts. So the whole life cycle of digital twin, which is also connected to the digital and the physical. And then I had another interview. He wasn't in my session, but I had an interview with a person from John Deere talking about agricultural equipment, and that's interesting. Connecting to sensors in the soil or other sensors in the equipment. He talked about something as mundane as planting corn, and their seeder will actually each corn each machine has, and I don't know how many, but a whole number of little drills that drill down into the earth and plant one seed of corn, and they figure out how far apart the seed should be, and they also have a z-axis of how deep it should be, and there are agricultural reasons for calculating all this, and each seed in a huge field is individually planted so that the corn will essentially grow together, and we won't have some stalks really big and some not quite germinated yet and all that sort of stuff. So science of agriculture. I live in an agricultural area and I know something about it, but that was very interesting too. So industry of things and connections. Everything is about connections. When I named this company several years ago, when I left my previous employer, I looked at what was next. I had been with Control Engineering magazine, and it was all about controls and PLCs and motion control and all that sort of stuff. Went to Automation World, and the name was picked for me when I got there. It was going to be called Automation World, but I thought that's very timely because we've moved way back then, 2003 timeframe, from control to automation, and it's more the not just the control, but information that goes with it, and information handling and all that sort of stuff. So then when I was leaving Automation World, it's like, what's next? And I started looking, and I said, well, it's all about connections. So everything is getting connected these days, and we had been connecting. I mean, this has been going on for a long time. But it's what are we going to do with the connections? And this was actually even before a lot of Internet of Things buzz happened, but it did. Rockwell came up with the Connected Enterprise slogan just about the same time. Emerson started talking about connections about the same time. And now Honeywell has Connected Enterprise also. And Siemens and a lot of people, it's all about connections these days. So I think I picked the right thing at the right time and going on, and so it's still all about connections. So that was a great conference. And I thought I'd like to morph a little bit at the end of this podcast about podcasts themselves. A lot of what I've done since I started blogging in 2003, and believe it or not, I'm going on 14 years now of this kind of media. And previously, if you wanted to get your views out there, you had to find a magazine or a book publisher, and you were beholden to someone else. And then Dave Weiner was one of the earliest people, and he developed a blogging platform called Frontier and Radio Userland, and that was my first blogging platform way back then. Was Radio Userland, and I think my title was Gary's Radio Weblog or something like that. And then it changed names again. But anyway, just one person had the power to go out and get his voice heard or her voice heard without having a filter or had to convince some editor to publish it or whatever. And I spent years talking to marketing people about, use magazines. They have readers, and that's all well and good. Or use me. I have readers and listeners. And if you want to advertise or just get your news out, that's fine. But I kept telling them, do your own thing. Be like the earliest one I know about in our industry was Jim Cahill over at Emerson Process Management at the time, and it was like Dave Weiner was tired of getting interviewed by magazines, and they'd interview for you for an hour, and they'd use two sentences, and they were probably wrong. And I know I followed in my career as an editor about can I read my stuff because the last guy that interviewed me had the whole quote misconstrued, or some PR person would put together an interview and they'd want to talk for a half hour, and I say, I can only use a paragraph, so let's not go too far. Give me basically a sound bite. That's all I can honestly really use. And that was all a pain. It was a pain to me as a writer, actually, to get all this information, and I couldn't use very much. So this whole idea of Dave Weiner called the source going direct. So Jim Cahill over at Emerson took that ball and he ran with it, and he started blogging and tweeting, and I think he did some podcasting, I don't remember. But and at conferences they were doing videos and all this other new media, and so he could go direct, and then he could also give it to magazines and other sources. Occasionally I link to him if it's something of interest to me, even to this day. So not everything applies to me, but some of it's pretty cool. So I'll link back. So anyway, that's an interesting thing. There's a big flap about Uber right now, the kind of taxi company that they try to call it some other kind of a company, but it's actually just a taxi company with a better way to find a ride. But this company has had problems with sexual harassment since it started, I think. And they had an engineer that worked there, and she quit. And after she quit, then she wrote a blog post about her experiences as a woman in Uber and the sexual harassment and some specifics and so on that just exploded. And And previously, if you went to HR and HR didn't do anything, that was it. It was really hard to get your story out. So she could write a blog post, it gets picked up and goes viral, and it causes a lot of things. Now they're trying to bring in a high level uh, investigative team to investigate systematic sexual harassment at Uber. And I'll tell you, the stories coming out of there over the last 3 years or so sure read like some systematic stuff going on there. I won't use Uber. I'll use Lyft, but I refuse that one simply for that reason. So that's a source going direct kind of idea. So if you're a marketing person listening to this, I mean, I'll if it's something that's applicable to my readers, I'm more than happy to publicize it and give it an analysis and that sort of thing. But I certainly do recommend that you also use your own channels and and develop your own email lists and all that stuff and go direct. I may or may not read it. Some marketing people just can't contain themselves and they have to use superlatives and BS basically. But some marketing people are very smart and they just provide useful information. And there's boy no other way to build a clientele and repeat readers than to give useful information about your product, your service, the benefits of it, people that use it, ideas, all that kind of stuff is just fantastic. So it's just another, what is it, quiver in the or arrow in the quiver kind of idea. But I sure do recommend that to people. You have to be good. You need to dedicate resources, but you can really help build a community around your product if you do that. So the whole sources go direct idea I think is good. So anyway, this basically was about connections, and this whole idea of sources go direct is another way to build connections for your company. And we build connections technologically, we build connections for our businesses, and that's kind of where the industry is right now. So once again, uh, the industry of things, you can go to industryofthingusa.com and find last year's and hints about next year's. They don't have next year's site. They have to move sites, they told me, to find something a little bit bigger. They outgrew the Hard Rock Hotel where they were. So there'll be more information coming, and I'll keep you informed too. So my next stuff is going to ABB's conference, and I'm going to Hanover, and I had marked down another user conference, but evidently that one is fizzled, so I won't publicize it. Protect the innocent, as they say. And I don't know where else you'll find me in the near future, but if you're going to Hanover, ping me and maybe we can meet up. So in the meantime, this podcast is brought to you by Ignition from Inductive Automation. This is Gary Minchell. Have a good day.